Love in the 19th century was never born of roses and moonlight. It was born of ledgers, bloodlines, and cold arithmetic. Mira knew the sum by heart. She was 25, penniless, and possessed a tongue sharp enough to draw blood. Her aunt made certain she remembered her exact worth every single morning. "No gentleman will ever want you," Aunt Kamala had sneered, and she wasn't wrong. Gentlemen wanted quiet, pliable things. Fortunately, the man standing beside his overturned carriage at midnight wasn't a gentleman at all. He was an earl. The drawing room at Thornmere Hall always smelled of damp plaster and old regret. Mira sat near the window, chasing the last of the afternoon light with a needle, mending the frayed hem of her only decent dress. The hearth held exactly 2 coals. Aunt Kamala guarded the coal scuttle the way a general guards a siege line. "You're pulling the thread too tight," Kamala said, without looking up from her ledger. "If I leave it loose, the seam will split," Mira answered flatly. She had long since abandoned the soft, musical voice young women were trained to use. It cost too much energy to maintain. Kamala finally raised her eyes. Pale, hard things set in a face that years of bitterness had pinched tight. She had taken Mira in 8 years ago, when fever had claimed her parents and creditors had claimed the estate. It was charity Mira paid for every single day. "A ruined seam would suit you," Kamala said, her voice like cracking ice. "It would match the rest of you. Mrs. Sharma came for tea yesterday. Do you know what she asked me? Whether we'd finally managed to catch the rats in the pantry. She asked if you were unwell. You sat there 20 minutes staring at the wall, and when her nephew tried to make conversation about the weather, you told him rain was simply water and required no philosophical debate." Kamala rose, her cane striking the threadbare rug. "You are 25 years old. You have no dowry. Your jaw is too square. Your temper too willful for a woman in your position. You are a dependent in my house, eating my food, burning my coal, and yet you carry yourself as though you have the luxury of choice. Poor women do not get that luxury. No gentleman will ever want you, Mira. Not with that mouth, not with that pride. You will die alone in a cold room, and you will have no one to blame but yourself." The words didn't shock her. They were only an echo of what she told herself in the dark. But hearing them spoken aloud still landed like a physical blow. She didn't cry. Crying was for women who had someone to comfort them. Mira set the dress aside, stood, and smoothed her skirts. "I'm going to check the boundary fence." "It's about to pour," Kamala snapped. "Then I shall get wet." Mira walked out without an umbrella. She grabbed her heavy woolen cloak from the peg by the kitchen door, pulled on her mud-stained boots, and stepped into the biting wind of the gray afternoon. The sky hung the color of bruised iron. The cold was almost a relief. It numbed the ache in her chest. Thornmere Hall had once been respectable. Now it was a hollow shell surrounded by overgrown fields and rotting timber. The boundary fence along the post road had been leaning for weeks. Mira knelt in the mud beside the broken rail, her bare hands raw against the splintered wood. It wouldn't budge. "That seems a poor strategy for carpentry," a voice said from the road. Mira spun around. A large black carriage sat half-tilted in a ditch, one wheel sunk deep in the clay. A man stood a few yards off, watching her over the broken fence. Tall, rain-soaked, with sharp gray eyes. The Earl of Ashcombe hated the countryside. He hated the city too, but at least the city had paved roads. He'd been traveling since dawn, fleeing London and the suffocating matchmaking schemes of the ballroom set. Being an earl came with a staggering fortune and a target on his back the size of a cathedral. He was 29, unmarried, and thoroughly exhausted by the performance of his own life. "Are you addressing me?" Mira asked. Her voice held none of the breathless deference women usually adopted once they realized who he was. Then again, She had no idea who he was. "I'm the only other person here," the Earl replied, resting his gloved hand on his walking stick. "Unless you frequently converse with sheep." "The sheep offer better advice," she shot back, "and they don't state the obvious. My fence is broken. Your carriage is stuck. I imagine we both have better things to do than critique each other's methods." The Earl felt a strange jolt of surprise, not offense, but genuine amusement. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him without filtering every word through flattery. "Fair enough," he said, stepping over the low stone wall, his fine boots sinking instantly into the mud. Up close, he realized she wasn't as tall as she'd seemed, just fiercely postured. She smelled of rain, wet wool, and faintly of sandalwood soap. "Hold the top rail," he instructed. She stared at him. "I don't need your help. I have nothing but time. Hold the rail." She hesitated, then grabbed the wet wood. On three, they shoved together. The swollen timber snapped back into the joint with a sharp crack. The fence held. "Thank you," Mira said, the words sounding sour in her mouth. "I never got your name," he said, as she turned to leave. "No," Mira said softly, without looking back. "You didn't," and she disappeared into the rain. That night, at his friend Devraj's estate, the hostess gossiped over dinner about the ruined Thornmere family, the poor, unmarriageable niece with the dreadful temper, name of Mira. The Earl didn't hear another word spoken for the rest of the evening. By morning, Aunt Kamala had learned the crest on the carriage belonged to the Earl of Ashcombe. The explosion was spectacular. You spoke to him, standing in the mud like a beggar, and you spoke to an earl. You've ruined us. I gave him directions to the inn, Aunt. We have no fire. What hospitality were we meant to offer? You are poison, Mira. You ruin everything you touch with your pride. That night, wrapped in 2 thin blankets, the last coals long since burned to ash, Mira cried for the first time in years. The next morning, the Earl rode out alone. Thornmere Hall, up close, was a carcass, black with damp, its roof slumped like a broken spine, the gardens a tangle of dead briar. He knocked. Aunt Kamala answered, in a fit of trembling, obsequious delight, and when Mira finally entered the drawing room, hair pinned severely, dress mended at the elbows, shame crept up her neck. She knew exactly why he'd come, not to apologize, to inspect the ruin. "I owe you no apology," Mira said, her voice stripped of the fire she'd shown at the fence. "You wanted to see it, didn't you? The poverty. Well, here it is, my lord. The roof leaks, the coal is rationed, and we are entirely ruined. I hope the reality matched the entertainment you were hoping for." The room went silent. Kamala looked as though she might faint. "Go to your room," she hissed. "Get out of my sight." The Earl left, sick with the realization that he hadn't been chivalrous. He'd simply walked into her cage to look at the bars. That night, Kamala's fury turned vicious. She burst into Mira's room. "I have a distant cousin in Allahabad. Blind, bedridden, in need of a companion. You will be on the midnight mail coach. Pack your trunk." Fear traced ice down Mira's spine. Allahabad was hundreds of miles away, a slow death sentence for her spirit. The stable boy, whom Mira had always fed scraps of bread, ran 3 miles in the dark to Devraj's estate and told the Earl everything. The Earl didn't stop for a coat. He saddled his horse himself and rode into the black, rutted night at a reckless gallop, wind tearing through his thin shirt. "No gentleman will ever want you." The words echoed in his mind the entire ride. They were all fools. None of them could see the fire beneath the smoke. He arrived just as the mail coach rumbled to a stop outside the inn. Mira stood by the road, hood up, a battered satchel gripped in white-knuckled hands. The Earl leapt from his horse and tossed a gold coin to the driver. This woman is not traveling to Allahabad. Leave her trunk with the innkeeper. Drive on." The coach rolled away. Mira turned on him, shaking with anger. "Who gave you the right to decide where I go?" "It was my mistake," the Earl said, teeth chattering, coatless in the freezing wind. "I walked into your aunt's house without thinking what it would cost you. I underestimated her cruelty." Mira looked at his blue-tinged lips. "You're not wearing a coat," she said, her anger suddenly draining into disbelief. "I was in a hurry," he said. "Give me 10 minutes to explain myself. If you still wish to leave after that, I'll hire a private carriage and send you to Allahabad myself." Inside the inn, by the fire, the Earl finally stripped away every polished lie he'd ever told. He spoke of a life built entirely on transaction, of women bred to be agreeable and hollow, of 10 years surrounded by a sea of smiling liars. "I am asking you to marry me," he said. Mira stared at him, waiting for the joke that never came. "You're mad. The cold has frozen your wits." "I have never been more lucid in my life." She paced away, panic warring with something else entirely. "You don't want a wife. You want a rebellion, a way to shock your polished little world." "I want a partner," he said quietly, closing the distance between them. "A woman who will tell me when I am being an arrogant fool. A woman who knows what it costs to survive. I want you." She searched his eyes for pity and found none, only a desperate need for something real. "I want my own allowance," she said finally, chin lifting. "I will not beg for pin money." "Done. And I want the gardens, all of them. They're yours. And I want to never be cold again." He took her raw, calloused hands in his. "You have my word, Mira. You will never be cold again." End. The next morning, the Earl's carriage rolled up the rutted drive of Thornmere Hall. Aunt Kamala sat in her freezing drawing room, expecting the maid to confirm the midnight coach had carried her problem away for good. Instead, the door opened to reveal Mira, and behind her, casting a long shadow into the cold room, the Earl of Ashcombe. "This is my future wife," he said, his voice smooth, polite, and utterly lethal. "And you should know, by the end of the week, I will own every debt against this estate. You'll receive a modest stipend. You will never contact her again." Mira looked at her aunt, not with triumph, only quiet pity. "Goodbye, Aunt Kamala. I hope you enjoy the fire." The carriage pulled away, turning its wheels from Thornmere forever. Mira leaned her head against the Earl's shoulder as London rose ahead of them. Love in the 19th century was built on cold arithmetic, but sometimes, against all odds, two ruined sums collided in the dark and somehow made something whole.